Academic models of social influence almost universally describe compliance as a conscious transaction, where a subject recognizes an authority figure, evaluates a request, and chooses to obey. Empirical data reveals striking deviations from this model. Engaging in motor synchrony, the temporally organized coordination of movement in unison with a stranger, radically alters a subject's willingness to perform altruistic acts. A similar anomaly occurs with the administration of a single neuropeptide. A neuropeptide is a signaling molecule used by neurons to communicate and regulate physiological functions. When subjects inhale this peptide, they willingly engage in highly unorthodox behaviors, such as swearing or dancing on command. Compliance is a mechanically engineered state. By utilizing specific biological and behavioral primers, an agent can bypass conscious social resistance entirely. The traditional concept of the rational actor assumes that we comply based on a calculus of rewards and coercions, weighing what we stand to gain against what we stand to lose. The anomalies of synchronization and neuropeptides induce a state of hypersuggestibility. Hypersuggestibility is a psychological condition where the brain's critical filtration systems are suppressed, allowing it to accept external cues without logical friction. We will deconstruct 3 specific vectors of unconscious influence to see how this works. First, behavioral synchrony. Second, neurochemical modulation. And finally, cognitive overload. If a subject's physiological or environmental baseline is artificially altered, their conscious resistance is neutralized before a request is even made. In 2011, researchers Valdesolo and DeSteno seated subjects across from a stranger and instructed them to tap along to an audio track in either synchronous or asynchronous patterns. Following the exercise, the subject watched the stranger being unfairly assigned an arduous 45-minute logic test, while a second confederate took an easy 10-minute task. The researchers then gave the subject an anonymous opportunity to stay behind and help the victim complete that grueling logic task. Subjects who had tapped asynchronously worked to help for an average of 93 seconds. Those who had tapped in unison stayed for an average of 407 seconds. This raises an investigative question. Is the brain simply increasing its affinity for the stranger, or is a deeper autonomic appraisal occurring? This path model shows the statistical mediators calculated by the researchers to isolate the drivers of this altruistic behavior. The data shows that synchrony increases the subject's perception of similarity. This sense of similarity functions as the sole driver of the compassionate response and the subsequent helping behavior. This chart shows a null path for generic liking. This affection plays no part in generating actual compassion or altruism. Interpersonal synchrony serves as a primitive, low-level marker used by the brain to track shifting group affiliations and maximize reciprocal payoff potential. Neurochemical primers follow a similar logic, as seen in a double-blind trial conducted by psychologists Bryant and Hung. To test the limits of persuasion, the researchers isolated highly hypnotizable subjects, individuals with a naturally high capacity to respond to suggestion. Subjects self-administered an intranasal spray of either 24 IU of oxytocin or a placebo. An international unit, or IU, is a standardized measurement of a substance based on its specific biological activity. The experimenters then administered hypnotic suggestions, commanding the subjects to perform socially unorthodox acts, such as spontaneously swearing or dancing during the session. This bar chart visualizes the behavioral outcomes. The placebo group showed a 39% compliance rate, while the oxytocin group jumped to 80%. Oxytocin leaves consciousness and reality testing intact, operating through a mechanism distinct from psychotomimetic drugs like LSD. This causal path model illustrates how the peptide dampens the HPA axis. The HPA axis, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is the neuroendocrine system that regulates the body's response to stress. By suppressing it, oxytocin mechanically lowers the subject's baseline anxiety regarding social embarrassment. The peptide also hypersensitizes the subject to the perceived social expectations of the experimenter. Oxytocin manufactures compliance by suppressing the physiological anxiety that normally guards against socially unorthodox behavior. These principles extend to systemic environmental manipulation. Clinical hypnotherapist Ted Moreno identifies this mechanism in the architecture of digital media. Infinite scrolling feeds target dopamine-releasing reward systems, using high information velocity to exhaust the conscious mind's organizational capacity. When data arrives too fast for logical processing, the conscious filtration system fails. The resulting cognitive state is a hypnotic trance characterized by absorption, time distortion, and profound automaticity. Automaticity is the execution of a behavior without conscious intention or a sense of control. In this state of environmental overload, affective primes like fear or rage are absorbed directly by the subconscious, inducing a state of systemic hypersuggestibility. Mid-century sociologists French and Raven defined the classic bases of social power, focusing heavily on mechanisms like reward and coercive power. Their model relies on the constraint of observability. A subject typically only complies if the authority figure can monitor their behavior. This matrix compares the classic model against three unconscious vectors of modern influence. Classical reward and coercive power occupy the upper left quadrant, requiring conscious evaluation and high observability. Synchrony, oxytocin, and cognitive overload occupy the lower right quadrant, operating unconsciously and requiring zero observability. Modern influence mechanisms operate by shifting a subject's internal state, bypassing the need for constant external monitoring. We have mapped a triad of unconscious influence: fabricated similarity through rhythm, chemical anxiety suppression through peptides, and hypersuggestibility through overload. These findings contradict the professional model of rapport as a complex social construct requiring rational dialogue. Rapport is a synthesized state triggered by low-level primers. Conscious logic represents a small fraction of human decision-making. The majority of our choices are dictated by autonomic biological drivers operating below the surface. The most potent forms of social persuasion occur well below the level of rational argument and structural authority. Compliance is the result of physiological and environmental substrates being engineered to produce an affirmative response.